The prairie had a way of holding silence like a long breath. Just before dusk, the wind settled into itself, and even the crows quieted, perched like judgment on the fence posts. He rode with his back straight and eyes low, the creak of the saddle and the steady clop of his horse the only sound between him and the dying light. Dust curled behind him, and sweat clung to his collarbone beneath the worn cotton of his shirt. It was a long ride back from town, and the weight of old supplies, salt pork, coffee, a child's blanket, cut into the flanks of his horse, just as memory gnawed at him. At the edge of the property, he paused. The wind shifted, brought the scent of turned earth and something else, coppery, faint. A dog barked once and fell silent. He urged the horse forward, his hand grazing the rifle strapped to his saddle. His ranch was modest, framed in graying wood and crooked nails. It bore the scars of hail and fire and men. Behind the barn, a small mound of earth rose beside a crooked cross made from fence slats. He dismounted, brushed his fingers over the wood, then straightened and turned toward the house. That's when he saw his child standing at the edge of the corn rows, hand held out like a peace offering to something crouched in the weeds. He called the boy's name low, wary. The child didn't flinch, only turned slightly and pointed. "She's hurt, Pa." His steps were slow at first, cautious. Then faster. What he found was a woman barely breathing, curled into herself like something the land had spat out. Dirt matted her hair, sweat slicked her temple, and her belly, round and taut with life, rose beneath a torn muslin dress. Her lips were cracked, her feet bare, and her wrists bore the raw red circles of rope. Flies circled her like she was already half gone. He knelt beside her, one hand on the pistol at his hip, the other hovering over her brow. She opened her eyes just enough to flinch. Her mouth worked for words, but none came. Only the faintest exhale. He should have left her. That was the first thought. The world didn't reward kindness, not out here, not anymore. A black woman, pregnant, alone. He knew what that meant in this part of the world. And he knew what it would mean if someone saw her on his land. But his son was watching, wide-eyed and solemn, and the ghost of another woman lay behind the barn. He lifted her gently, staggered a little under her weight. She moaned softly, and he could feel her limbs tense against him. But she didn't fight. She was too far gone for that. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he felt the heat of her fever through his shirt. Inside, he laid her on the cot by the hearth. The house was 2 rooms, walls thin, floors creaky, nothing fancy. He barked a command to the boy to fetch water, then soaked a cloth and began wiping the dirt from her face. Her skin was bruised in places. A welt along her collarbone peeked from under the torn neckline, and when he pulled the rag away from her shoulder, he saw it. Raised skin, scarred and burned in a shape that made his stomach knot. A brand. Letters twisted together. She stirred when he touched it. Eyes fluttered open again, dark and glassy. "You're safe now," he said, and hated how uncertain it sounded. He didn't ask her name. Names felt like questions. And right now, she didn't know him any. Night fell heavy. Outside, the coyotes howled, but inside the house, it was only firelight and the slow, ragged breath of the woman on the cot. He fed the boy, who said nothing but kept glancing at the woman as if afraid she'd vanish. When the child was asleep, curled under his mother's old quilt, the man sat by the fire, his rifle across his knees. He didn't sleep. Once, in the darkness, the woman moaned and turned. Her fingers clawed weakly at her belly, and she murmured something too soft to catch. He moved to her side, dabbed her brow again, and felt something strange knot in his chest. The next morning brought no answers. She was still fevered, but breathing steadier. He offered her water, and this time she drank, though her eyes never left his face. Distrust sat thick in them, justified. He didn't try to reassure her. He just moved slow and said little. The boy brought her an old pair of shoes from under the bed, worn but usable. She touched them like they were fragile, her fingers trembling. She tried to sit, winced and leaned back. "She gonna stay?" the boy asked quietly, standing by the doorway. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped outside, letting the screen door slam behind him. The sky was iron gray, the wind picking up dust like whispers. He stared out over the land, where nothing moved but ghosts and guilt. Inside, he could hear her breathing, the way the house seemed to hold her sound. Something about it all clung to his ribs. He didn't know who she was, but he knew the kind of man who'd brand a woman like that. He'd seen men like that, fought beside them, watched them build fires with bones. He told himself he'd take her to town in a day or two. Let the preacher or the widow who ran the boarding house figure it out. But the road to town was long, and his son's eyes had seen too much already. For now, he'd built a fire. For now, the door was locked. For now, the gun stayed loaded. She slept again. The child drew shapes in the dust with a stick, humming softly. And in the distance, carried faint on the wind, a crow cried once, then fell silent. The first time she stood on her own feet, the wind caught the hem of her borrowed dress and lifted it like a whisper. Her legs trembled, her belly pulled forward like an anchor, but she stayed upright. The man watched from the porch, his hands stained with oil from fixing the barn hinges, his face unreadable. She didn't look at him. She looked out across the field, where the prairie bled into the horizon and the sun peeled back the morning frost like a second skin. She hadn't spoken much. Not beyond what necessity allowed. Yes for water. No for pain. A nod when the boy offered her cornbread with grubby fingers and shy eyes. Words seemed to weigh more for her, as though everyone cost something she couldn't afford to spend. He didn't press. He'd lived long enough to know that silence, too, was a kind of story. She'd been with them 5 days now. In that time, the house had begun to change shape. The child was louder, singing, asking questions, trailing her as she moved from chair to window to porch. The man wasn't sure what startled him more, her presence or how quickly it became normal. She fit into the quiet like she'd always been there, even if her body carried the sharp geometry of trauma. Her eyes scanned exits. Her shoulders tensed at distant sounds. But she moved with purpose, cleaning the hearth, rethreading the broken line on the clothesline, teaching the boy a song in a low, rhythmic hum. At night, he sometimes heard her crying through the wall. Soft, like rain on dead leaves. Not broken sobs, just grief escaping through the cracks. He never asked, and she never explained. It was on the 6th day that she spoke a sentence longer than a whisper. She was chopping carrots with a dull knife, her belly leaning against the table. The boy sat nearby, carving nonsense into a block of wood. "Do you ever lock your doors?" she asked. He looked up from where he was fixing the hinge on the pantry. "Usually don't have to." She didn't look at him, but her voice stayed steady. "You will." He didn't answer. But that night, he slipped the iron bar across the front door before blowing out the lamp. The next morning they found tracks. Hoof prints along the edge of the property. 2 horses, maybe 3, circling but never crossing onto the yard. The man stood over them, frowning, the boy tugging at his hand. "Could be drifters," he said aloud, more for himself than for her. "Could be nothing." She stared at the prints, her hand resting on the small of her back. "They're looking for me." "How sure?" Sure enough. He met her eyes. They didn't blink. He didn't ask who. Not yet. They returned to the house without speaking. That afternoon, he pulled his rifle from under the floorboards, oiled it slow, piece by piece. She watched from the doorway. Her silence had changed. No longer wary. Now it was waiting. That evening, the man sat beside her on the porch, while the child slept inside with the dog curled beside him. The stars came out slow, one by one, like old debts remembered. "Who branded you?" he asked. She didn't move for a long time. Then she said, "The man who married me." He felt something cold move in his chest. "He sold me 2 months after I started showing. Said the child wasn't his. Said I'd outlived my purpose. He got good money for me. From a preacher in Kansas who needed help harvesting the souls of savage men." The man spat into the dirt. "I ran," she continued. "Killed the preacher's mule to slow him down. Walked 30 miles before the fever hit. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Instead, he reached into his pocket, took out a folded scrap of paper, an old map, and flattened it between them. Next nearest town's 38 miles west, he murmured. I could take you. Leave you with the doc. Might be safer there. She traced the lines with her finger, stopped near the edge. Nowhere safe. Not when he's still alive. Something like shame pricked at the edges of his pride. He hadn't thought past shelter, past kindness. But she had. She'd lived longer in the fire. She knew it wouldn't go out just because someone closed a door. The boy grew attached. That was the problem. He brought her daisies he picked from the edge of the field. He asked if her baby would like honey. He showed her his mother's grave and said, "It's okay if you cry. I did for a while too." That night, the woman stood by the grave alone, her hand on her belly. The man watched from the porch, heart caught somewhere between ache and awe. The wind picked up again the next day, brought with it the stink of ash. Off in the distance, black smoke twisted upward like a warning. Another homestead burnt. Not random. She knew it. So, did he. They're sweeping the land, she said. One house at a time. He looked at the boy, who was helping dig up carrots for stew, his hands dirty, eyes bright. He thought of the last war he'd survived, of men torn from their children, of women silenced by fire. I won't let them take this place, he said. You won't have to do it alone, she replied. Later that evening, he showed her how to load the rifle. Her hands didn't shake. She said nothing, but the way she held the weapon told him all he needed to know. She was not made of fragility. She was built from bones set wrong and reset again. When they sat by the fire that night, the child between them, she hummed the same tune she'd sung in fragments before, low and rolling, like water in a canyon. The boy fell asleep against her arm, and she looked at the man. He doesn't flinch when I touch him, she said. He nodded, barely breathing. That means something. It did, though neither of them could say what. And outside, beyond the edge of firelight, something watched them. Something waiting, by the seventh night. The wind began to shift, no longer restless, but sure of itself, like a dog that's caught a scent. The man rose before dawn, woke the boy gently, and motioned for silence. The woman was already up, standing barefoot on the porch, wrapped in a wool shawl too thin for the chill. Her eyes were on the east, where red bled into the sky like an open wound. They're close, she said. He nodded. He had the same feeling in his bones, the kind that kept you alive in battle, the one that knew when stillness meant danger. He loaded the rifles with method and muscle memory, then handed her a pistol with a fresh box of cartridges. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers worked the weapon like someone reacquainted with an old truth. They boarded up the windows while the boy packed a sack of biscuits and jerky. The dog barked once, low and uncertain. Then silence folded over the land again, heavy as a hanging. The man led them out back, to a shallow cellar beneath the shed, dug for potatoes, repurposed for ghosts. It was damp, lined with cracked clay and the scent of root rot. He looked at her, then at the boy. Stay here. No light, no sound. Not until I come back. She stared at him, jaw set. You're not staying up there alone. His gaze held hers. I ain't hiding a pregnant woman and a child above ground when men are riding through fire for blood. Her voice dropped. Then you'd best not die. The moment passed between them. Not soft, not tender, but electric with unspoken things. Then she knelt, pulled the child close, and let the man close the wooden slat over their heads. He crouched in the barn's loft, rifle across his lap, breath slow as molasses. The first rider came before midday, a pale blur against the heat shimmer. He was followed by two more, one thin and long in the coat, the other wide across the chest with a face like spoiled meat. They moved slow, deliberate, like men who expected no resistance. The lead rider dismounted. His boots sank into the dust as he stepped toward the porch, spurs whispering menace. The man in the loft watched, thumb against the trigger. He recognized the look, someone who'd hurt too many without consequence. Nice little place, the rider called out, loud enough for the wind to carry. Saw some tracks leading this way. "You seen a woman? Dark-skinned, with a mouth too loud for her station?" No answer. The man watched as the rider walked to the door, knocked once, then kicked it open. He didn't flinch. Not yet. From inside the house came muffled cursing. Cabinets flung open. Footsteps across floorboards. The other two riders remained outside, their eyes on the barn, hands near their weapons. When the rider stepped out again, scowling, the man in the loft took his shot. The echo cracked the silence, wide open. The man with the thick chest dropped where he stood, his hat flying off, dust leaping in a halo. The other two scrambled, one ducking behind a water barrel, the lead running for cover near the fence. Horses screamed and bolted. Then came gunfire. Splinters flew from the barn walls. The man rolled to the side, reloaded, and fired again. Another miss. Another volley back. Adrenaline erased thought. He moved like muscle memory, ducking, shooting, counting the rhythm of their reloads. A bullet ripped through the loft wall just inches from his head. He cursed and fired twice more. From behind the shed, a sound broke through, the creak of the cellar door. He froze. Then he saw her. The woman, belly and all, had slipped out while the shots rang out. She was behind the rider near the fence, crouched low, holding a rock in both hands. He saw it too late to stop her. The crack of stone on skull was sickening. The rider fell without a scream. She staggered back, clutching her belly, but her eyes burned with fury. She wasn't a survivor. She was a reckoning. The man dropped the last rider with a clean shot to the thigh, then descended from the loft before the man could crawl away. He stood over him, rifle aimed, breath ragged. "Where's your boss?" he demanded. The wounded rider spat. "You don't get it. He's already coming. You think this was it? You think she just walks away?" The woman approached slowly, the pistol now in her hand. "He'll come for the child," the rider grinned. "And when he does, he'll burn the land to ash." She shot him once, in the chest. Not out of rage, but clarity. The kind that ends a chapter. Silence fell again. But it was different now. The air felt stripped bare. Exposed. They buried the bodies far from the house, in a shallow arroyo where the coyotes would do what time couldn't. The child watched but didn't speak. He held her hand when she sat to catch her breath. That evening, the man boarded up the front door for good. They sat inside, the three of them, close to the fire. She nursed a cut along her knuckles. He poured a shot of whiskey into a tin cup and passed it to her. She drank. No grimace. Just fire down the throat to match the one in her belly. "What's his name?" the man asked softly. "The one coming?" She nodded. He let the name hang in the air like a storm cloud. "I've heard of him," he said. "But I didn't know he sold women now." She looked at the fire. "He sells anything that can't fight back." A pause. "Until now," she added. The child leaned against her side. The man stared at them both, something shifting behind his eyes. Not pity. Not rescue. Just recognition. Outside, the wind had changed again. It no longer smelled of blood. It smelled of dust and iron and what came after. And in the distance, riding slow beneath the stars, a new shadow approached the land. The rider arrived at dusk, alone but not empty. Dust trailed him like a vengeful spirit, his coat stained with road and rain, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face carved by cruelty. His horse was bone-thin but unbroken, its flanks marked with the same scars the man bore on his arms, proof of battles won through pain, not righteousness. He didn't speak when he reached the edge of the property. He just sat there, watching the house as if waiting for it to breathe. Then he dismounted, slow and deliberate, boots crunching over dry soil like the ticking of a clock no one could stop. Inside, the man checked the rifle again. His hands were steady, but his chest felt tight, like a storm held under ribs. The woman stood by the back door, pistol holstered beneath her coat, hair braided tight and tucked beneath a scarf. The child clung to the dog in the far room, silent as stone. They had prepared for this. But preparation was not protection, it was just a thinner kind of hope. She looked at the man and said, "If I fall, you run with him." His jaw flexed. "You're not falling." She gave a half-smile, something brittle but brave. Then let's make sure. Outside, the stranger walked the porch, letting his fingers run along the boards. He knocked once. Not out of courtesy, but to remind them he didn't have to. "I know you're in there," he called, voice graveled with smoke and distance. "You've taken something of mine. And I've ridden too far, lost too much, to leave without it." The woman stepped forward, out of the shadow, and opened the front door. She stood in the threshold like a monument, barefoot, belly round, pistol at her hip. The man behind her moved like a shadow to her flame, rifle ready. "You sold me," she said, loud enough for the world to hear. The man on the porch gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes.
"No.
"I exchanged what was broken for something of value. But now I'm here to collect interest." She stepped fully onto the porch. "You think this child belongs to you?" He scoffed. "I don't give a damn about the brat. I want the memory gone." "You walking around, breathing like you're free? That's the problem." The wind dropped, and for a second the prairie held its breath. "I buried your name the night I ran," she said. "Let me bury your body, too." The gunshot rang before breath returned. Hers. A warning, not a miss. The bullet hit the post just beside his face. He drew faster than thought. But the man inside was already moving. 2 shots, one cracked from her pistol, one from his rifle. Her bullet grazed the stranger's shoulder, spinning him sideways. His missed wide, slicing into the siding. Then chaos. The stranger lunged, tackling her with a feral grunt, knocking her backward into the doorway. She fell hard, but the pistol stayed in her grip. The man rushed forward, but couldn't shoot without hitting her. They struggled on the floor, limbs tangled, her belly cradled in one arm while the other fought for control. The stranger struck her across the face, drawing blood. The boy screamed. The rifle cracked again. This time the bullet tore through the stranger's thigh. He howled, tried to stand, but the woman shoved him off with all the force of a mother protecting more than herself. She raised the pistol, aimed, and paused, just long enough to hear the man say, "You'll always be mine." She fired. The shot took him in the throat. He fell forward, choking on rage and blood, clawing at the floorboards like something trying to crawl back into hell. Then silence. For a long moment no one moved. Then the child ran to her, wrapping small arms around her belly, his face buried in the folds of her dress. The dog barked once, sharp and triumphant. The man knelt beside them, touching her face, now streaked with blood and grit. "You all right?" She nodded, breath shallow. The baby kicked. He almost laughed, the sound breaking from somewhere between relief and awe. Still fighting. They buried the body behind the barn. No marker. Just stone and dust. Let the land keep its secrets. That night, the woman sat on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, a bruise blooming on her cheek, eyes fixed on the stars. The child curled at her feet, half asleep, mumbling something about dreams and fireflies. The man joined her, carrying 2 cups of water, setting one beside her. She looked at him, and after a while, asked, "Why did you help me?" He sipped from his cup, staring out over the land that no longer felt cursed. "Because someone should have." She nodded, slow and solemn. "Will you stay?" He didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he reached for her hand, and when she didn't pull away, he held it, firm, steady. Above them, the sky turned darker than coal, stars flickering like promises too stubborn to die. Inside her belly, a child stirred beneath bruised skin, and inside the house, a fire crackled with the soft, unhurried rhythm of life starting again. The past was buried. The fear burned. And in its place, something rare and wild had begun to grow. Family not by blood, but by choice. Hard-earned. Fiercely kept. The prairie wind carried no threats now. Only the song of quiet things healing.